Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to let everybody get in. So we'll take a few minutes for that before we get started. If you wouldn't mind in the chat, just telling us who you are for those that are calling in from either the app or from their computer. To just like to know your name, what community you're representing, if you want to share any affiliation, and then how did you find out about this event? We're really interested to know how you found out about this event. So welcome, Colleen from City, longtime partner of Sobly, of Urban League. Glad to have you here. I see we have our moderators for the chat have joined us. So Isis Ruff and Kayla McMillan are interns of Choice for All and Vision Street, and they will be facilitating the conversations in the chat. You can also post questions in the chat, and we will definitely make sure all of them get answered either during the event or afterwards if we run out of time. Welcome, Alita, Project Director for the State of Black Long Island, also known as Sobly. So like I said, just introduce yourself in the chat. Gonna give it just 2 more minutes and then we will get started because Jacob and I definitely like to respect people's time and tend to end early. So we want to stick to that, what we're known for, and respect your time this evening. Hi, Shamika, also a Sobly member. Thank you for joining us. Welcome, Larry Montgomery from Village Press. Welcome, Lucinda Das Mohan from CDC LI. Continue with the introductions. Welcome, Janine Thompson. Great, you received the information from Urban League. And glad to know you're also a member of the National Council of Negro Women in Huntington. Thank you. And please feel free to post any questions that you have as you come in. Also, we've just launched a poll, so please complete the poll. We want to check your familiarity with the Community Reinvestment Act, which is what we'll be talking about today. Wow, this is very impressive. to watch these numbers change in real time.
Right.
Very, very interesting. So I know more and more people are joining, so we're going to keep running this poll as everyone can see. It's still skewing more to people being familiar with the Community Reinvestment Act, which is very exciting for us to hear. We're hoping that more and more people, the people that answered no, that after the end of this webinar, you will be more familiar with it and be ready to advocate to your elected officials and to the higher up federal government even to express your concerns about the Community Reinvestment Act and its impact on low and moderate income communities and specifically Black Long Islanders. So I'm gonna keep it up a little while longer while we go through the introduction, since I know we're expecting a pretty large crowd. Please continue to introduce yourself. And like I said, Isis and Kayla will be managing the chat conversation. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my co-MC for this evening, Mr. Jacob Dixon.
Thank you, partner in crime, Appreciate it, and good evening, everyone. I am used to a call and response culture, so forgive me for this webinar format, but I hope you say good evening back in return. And we thank you all for being part of a two-part series that we have in collaboration with Choice for All, Vision Street Research, and the State of the Black Long Island Equity Council, convened by Urban League of Long Island. And today's first part is about the Community Reinvestment Act and why does it actually matter to Black Long Islanders. And so just to do a quick recap of what we're going to be doing today as part of our virtual town hall. We wish we could do this in person, but because of the fact of the pandemic and making sure we keep with social distancing and how we're able to do this, we hope that this at least could be interactive and then can provide more opportunities digitally for folks to be engaged with. So we're going to have some welcome and greetings, talk a little bit about our collaborative focus and how we got to this point. And then one of our amazing interns is going to be doing a presentation on a policy brief that we had developed on the CRA and recommendations for Black Long Islanders, a quick question and answer session, and then a call to action with the digital toolkit that's there. So before I continue, I want to pass this off to one of our fearless leaders, a dear mentor of mine, Teresa Sanders, president of the Urban League of Long Island. So after you.
Hi there. Thank you so much, Jacob and Erica, for your co-leadership in building out this education and equity summit. You know, when you talk about money and how do we get there, we have so many different portals of entry, but home ownership is so key to the foundation of building your wealth. And so I thank you for this encouraging conversation about CRA. I thank you for your team of interns who are going to make this go. I'm just sitting back for the ride. It feels so good not to have to do it all, but you are both next generation leadership. You are definitely moving into taking over significant positions in this particular region. I hope we could keep y'all here because we need you. We need you because topics like this are not being discussed in communities of color, and people don't understand how much, you know, federal regulations impact our local quality of life. So I thank you, and I'm looking forward to this discussion tonight. So carry on.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So what we wanted to do really quick for everyone as we pull up our slides is to give you a quick context about how we got to this point. And so again, I'm Jacob Dixon from Choice for All, and Erica Hill is the principal and founder actually of Vision Street Research. And in our partnership with the State of the Black Long Island Equity Council, we always frame the beginning of our conversations, and Lita, who's our project director here, has it where we're losing $24 billion each year when it comes down to racial injustice and inequity in areas that really impact the well-being of our region. And that's how this Equity Council was formed, through intense discussions and partnerships and collective thinking and thought leadership about how do we be able to advance issues intentionally for Black Long Islanders. And as Choice for All and Vision Street Research each independently has worked on issues around community and economic development, the shared synergies between all of us really aligned with the fact about how do we use research, policy, and organizing as means to really be able to advance this work, particularly around this. And so what I thought was also important, which is often a conversation within our Equity Council members, and we couldn't have done this without our Equity economic team, so we thank you so much for all those members who are part of it that are here tonight, is to really talk about what does that $24 billion really mean? And how does that connect with us? And so when we look at the examples of that, Urban League of Long Island had an amazing partnership with PolicyLink, and through that work, along with our thought leaders across the table in our coalition, talks about really in the pocket, it looks like our living wages as Black workers are on the decline, while all other racial and ethnic groups actually had a steady increase or a small increase throughout this time. And this chart even demonstrates that between 2000 to 2014, a decade later, we went down while every other ethnicity in particular went up. And that's how that $24 billion adds up when you multiply that times the number of Black Long Islanders that we have, as well as the systems that continue to perpetuate the inequities when it comes down to median hourly wage. Or we're talking about in terms of credit inclusion. our organization had an opportunity to work with the Federal Reserve Bank, with Urban League and City and other partners to really dive deep about credit inclusion and what does that look like. And on the regional level, we saw that over 77% of our region had 660 or higher in terms of that, and had prime credit lines and things of that nature. But then when we started going into the zip code level data, here's where that $24 billion gap comes again into play. Then when we started looking at zip code by zip code, the outer layer of the folks who were mostly impacted were Black population epicenters, particularly in Suffolk County, Wabanch, and in my own community of Roosevelt. And so this begged the question about what do we need to do, not just in terms of programs and services, but systems change in order to really build this out. And so with the economic equity team and the thought leadership of Sobly and our creative partners in our own organizations, we came together to collaboratively leverage these opportunities through what we're doing existingly and what we need to do uniquely in order to do that. And one of those areas in particular was focusing on the Community Reinvestment Act, where we're not just looking at this in terms of simply just with housing. And although housing is very important and it's connected to it after the housing market and the balloon issues that happen, especially with the crash and what's going on, we're also talking about community services that are impacting low to moderate income communities. We're talking about activities related to economic development and talking about really about how do we revitalize and stabilize low to moderate income neighborhoods. And so without taking any more time and effort, I want to pass this over to Erica to be able to introduce our awesome intern and how we got to this process together.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jacob, for that great introduction. So after being the co-chairs of the Sobly Economic Equity Action Team for some time and deciding on what we were going to focus on, Jacob and I decided there was also an opportunity to be able to bring in interns. And actually one of our members, Miss Newland, actually, who's works at Malloy, but also is over Nassau County Association of Black Social Workers, had a young lady that was looking for some hours because of the pandemic. So since Jacob and I had already been trying to figure out how do we get interns engaged in this work and how do we find them, since a lot of people, now that things were remote, it was harder to get access to them, we were able to put together a interdisciplinary collaborative internship where the interns that we've had, which includes this young lady I'm about to introduce, not only got experience to the work that I do as a for-profit organization, working on things revolving around Black businesses, minority and women business enterprises, and them getting access to grants and funding, workforce development, along with community outreach, but also being able to get access to the work that Jacob does as a community-based organization in Roosevelt in the direct services. So with that in mind, the very first intern that we had was none other than Teresa George, who has done this amazing job at putting together not only a policy brief, but also her first assignment within the first 2 days of actually joining us was to help us as well as Urban League to comment on the CRA rules. So she was able to take the different tools that I'd pulled together and to find some additional ones to help all three of us actually craft responses that we uploaded just in time for consideration in terms of our concerns as Black Long Islanders and the impact of the new CRA rules on Black Long Islanders. So without further ado, I'm gonna let Teresa George introduce herself and her project.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Teresa. I'm very happy to be here this evening. My name is Tanisha George. I am currently a candidate for the dual master's program at Stony Brook University, and a master's in social work and a master's in public health. Aforementioned, my assignment was to pull together the CRA policy brief as well as a presentation for the state of Black Long Island. And I live currently in Eastern Suffolk County. So this does have an impact in those Black Long Islanders that live out here as well. And without further ado, Jacob, do you mind just pulling up the PowerPoint for us?
Yes, absolutely. Okay.
Good evening.
The Economic Action Team's central goal and focus is for all Black Long Islanders to achieve financial security. Tonight, our presentation will be addressing the proposed amendments to the Community Reinvestment Act, or the CRA. First, the team will present a brief summary of the current policy. Then, we will be discussing into more detail defining the problem with the proposed reforms of the CRA. We will then provide an analysis of the modernized policy reforms. Lastly, the team will present recommendations to be performed by the State of Black Long Island Equity Council. The Community Reinvestment Act was signed by President Jimmy Carter in 1977 after several past acts that supported the prohibition of housing discrimination and credit discrimination. The regulatory agencies that include the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or the FDIC, the Federal Reserve, and the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, or the OCC, developed assessments that banks had to obey to address the needs of their communities. The goal of the CRA was to stop the practice of redlining, in which banks deny loans to home buyers and others based on their race or ethnic background. There have been a few reforms since 1977, but banks continue to fail to meet the criteria of the lower income communities. After 25 years since the last reform, the FDIC and OCC have presented the advance notice of proposed rulemaking, which outlines several changes that negatively impact the Black community. Since 2017, the Trump administration has been rescinding significant policies that were developed from the previous administration. Trump has encouraged the FDIC and OCC to propose new regulations for the CRA. The design of the advance notice of proposed rulemaking displays the weakening of anti-redlining laws. According to the recent studies, Black home ownership is lower today than in the 1960s. According to the source Trulia, their collected data in 2010 displays that white home ownership rate is higher than Black and Latinx home ownership. It also illustrates how Black home ownership rate is lower today than it was when the CRA was first introduced. Since the release of the CRA proposal, roundtable discussions were held for feedback on the revisions. The discussions focused on the core components, assessment areas, evaluating performance, and defining community development activities. When discussing assessment areas, the FDIC and the OCC proposed that it would allow banks to have the option to choose their geographic level because they believe it is their best option to determine the areas. Roundtable participants proposed that the assessment area designation should reflect the community needs. When discussing evaluating performance, FDIC and OCC suggested that the banks be evaluated based on a total unit number of CRA eligible loans and the total dollar amounts. The roundtable participants suggested that the bank's CRA evaluation should be based on more than the money loaned and focus on the impact of the bank's activities. When discussing defining community development activities, the FDIC and OCC were not clear and concise as to what those services would be and would like to keep the evaluation that is already in place. The roundtable participants suggested that the banks offer financial products and services that would help them become financially healthy through educational programs. Previously stated, the proposed revisions by the FDIC and OCC would negatively impact the Black community. The Economic Equity Action Team recommends that the State of Black Long Island educate Black Long Islanders. 1. Provide Black Long Islanders with facts and literature about the Community Reinvestment Act. 2. Mobilize the Black community leaders to encourage their community members to attend virtual town halls about the Community Reinvestment Act and provide input. 3. Create a multi-generational social media campaign to address the negative impact of the Community Reinvestment Act. 4. Develop a specific campaign that targets the population in the age range of 20 to 50 years old because they have a higher rate of consumption. This concludes our presentation. I would like to thank my current institution, Stony Brook University, with the guidance of Field Director Warren Graham, my Field Supervisor, Dr. Zakia Newland, the President of the Nassau-Suffolk Chapter of the Association of Black Social Workers, and my task supervisors, Erica Hill, the Principal at Vision Street Research, and Jacob Dixon, CEO of Choice for All.
Thank you so much, Tynesha, for that. I think it was quite informative in terms of not only how we were able to really capture the basics principles of the CRA, but also identifying what was being changed as a result of the recent policies from that and how that can lead towards different actions and recommendations of it. And so since then, what I wanted to share with you all specifically is some of the collective actions that we've taken since that. And more importantly, how have we been taking the leverage from this conversation with Tynesha and her policy brief report. And by the way, just as an update to everyone, we will be sharing all of these resources to you in an email. So if you did sign up for this, please know that you will be getting all these documents to help leverage the conversation region-wide, statewide, and nationally as well. And so we would love to hear, as part of the conversation through the chat, if you learned anything new from Tynesha's presentation, or did things affirm some of the information or the lived experiences that you may have, and making sure that we'll be able to connect those dots together. But also some of the actions that we have taken since is that with Urban League of Long Island and Vision Street Research and Choice for All, we have submitted letters to the OCC, the FDIC, and the Federal Reserve opposing those proposed changes, particularly to the CRA, and it was included as part of the documents that were sent over. And in fact, it has also helped in part being able to look at the House Joint Resolution 90, in which we are monitoring the status of that policy that is co-sponsored, by Representative Maxine Waters, and actually our own Representative Gregory Meeks. And we are happy to report that that resolution has just recently passed the House. We are now looking for that to see if it's passed through the Senate. And so there is some collective work that we need to do to make sure that this resolution, and in part, speaks specifically to the things that Tynesha has talked about, and reversing some of those issues and concerns that may impact the ability to provide lending to low to moderate income communities, or more specifically, Black communities. And so I would love to pass this over to Erica, because this is such an amazing advocacy toolkit that we think we will help be able to translate our message across as a region, uniting as one. So Erica.
Sure. Thank you, Jacob. And I want to give a shout out. I'm not sure if he's on, but Frank from NACIDA. So NACIDA is a coalition of agencies that work around community development. And it was because of the work that his organization did in terms of preparing kind of a toolkit of how we could create comments. We were able to turn that around so quickly with the help of Tynesha. So I do want to give a shout out to Frank Woodruff of NACIDA. If he is on here, thank you so much for your leadership and all the work that you've been doing to increase awareness about CRA. In terms of this digital toolkit, what we've kind of put together are just some examples of things that you could do very easily. You could do them while you're, quite frankly, on this Zoom if you're not on your phone. So as you see in the first, in the second slide after the cover page, you could do a tweet. So Jacob mentioned that Representative Maxine Waters and Representative Gregory Meeks are the ones that have co-sponsored Housing Joint Resolution 90, which is a resolution to nullify the Office OCC's harmful Community Reinvestment Act rule, right? Because back in, really at the height of the pandemic was when there was this rush to just approve these things, right? Knowing that there's already a crisis going on that is disproportionately impacting Black and brown communities, the OCC felt that they needed to hurry up and rush. And there were even some banks that had issues with the rules that were being proposed. So it's not just individuals, regular residents, and constituents. There were banks that didn't agree with it either, because the rules are lessening what is required. And that's not a good thing, because we already knew that there were inequities that were being faced by Black and brown individuals, particularly Black Long Islanders, as it relates to getting access to loans and other type of financial products. So another example, you could take the graphic itself, and then for like Facebook or Instagram, this was actually in the invite. And I can say this was authored by Teresa George, so I'm gonna give her credit for writing this caption, because it kind of brings to light, like this, the whole thing about the Community Reinvestment Act was passed back in 1977, right? And the purpose of it was to combat redlining, right? So the things that we've even seen were brought up in the Newsday article, right? About what has been being done by real estate agents, right? So we have real estate agents that we know about 49% of Black Long Islanders were impacted by just what the real estate agents were doing. And then you have banking institutions that were discriminating folks because of their zip code. So you saw in the chat that we asked kind of, what, do you live in any of these zip codes? Those are the zip codes that were among the highest in terms of not having access to credit products in the diagram that Jacob showed, right? So 1178 can be both Wyandanch and Wheatley Heights, depends on what side of the street you're on or where you're at, where the lines are drawn. 11550 Hempstead, 11575 Roosevelt, right? Those are zip codes that unfortunately have been impacted by this rule, and quite frankly, in some cases, the lack of teeth that it has in terms of being forced, where some banks have not been great participants of it, right? So there's a rating that they're given based on different activities. So the point of this one graphic is to say, like, there was a rush done in the middle of a double pandemic, right? Because not only now that we have the coronavirus, now there's a whole, civil unrest, right? That is also impacting Black Long Islanders, just Black people all over, and even brown, Latino, Latinx folks as well. So to have a rush to just pass something that was already negatively impacting these communities, just to say that it was put out there, and it's almost like being done while people are kind of distracted. You hear a lot on the news about the distractions, right? So people are focusing on the distractions and then not realizing that there are other things going on behind the scenes that'll impact you for a very long time. This is a good example of that. Like, this can't stand the way it is. So the fact that Representatives Maxine Waters and Gregory Meeks have put forth a resolution is a first step. The fact that it passed the House is a first step. But we needed to pass the Senate and get through, because the act cannot stand as is, right? Like, we cannot continue. The time is now. While we're advocating for everything else, we need to advocate for this, because this is going to hurt our communities. So we need everyone to be, taking action. So again, you see it says, like, have you ever suspected or knowingly been denied a loan based on your zip code? Send your story to info@choiceforall.org. We want to hear the stories. We were told, actually, before we ever knew we were going to be doing a town hall, we were having a Sobley council meeting, someone said that they lived in the Hempstead zip code and had like a 700 credit score and met all the other requirements, but was for some reason denied a loan, right? That's an example of a problem. Like, first of all, they're required to tell you why you're being denied a loan. And then to be able to see, like, is that really fair? Like, is that being done in a fair way? Or is it racist? Is it a racist act? The other thing is, there is a website for you to check a bank's rating, a CRA rating. So I visited it before we had this webinar. And I actually typed in one of the banks that I patronize. I will not mention them. But I went in there, and you can get a full rundown of what their ratings are. You can also get more. We'll be sending out more information about the CRA, so you can read more for yourself. But it's definitely something for everybody to be watching and be aware of. We also have an email template for you to reach out to elected officials to see if, for their support in this, so this can pass in Senate. And I do see that Larry Montgomery is raising his hand. So Larry, can you put your question in the chat unless you're on the phone? So I saw a raised hand. I'm just waiting for the question or comment. And please feel free to put your questions So he put 50 years. So 50 years in terms of the time frame. Just Larry, let us know what you're wanting us to share, and we'll definitely share it out loud. For everyone else, if you have questions, please post them in the chat. We're here ready to answer them. And I understand because this is a webinar and there were expected over 50 people, it would have been a lot to have folks be able to have their video and have audio on, which is why in the webinar format, unfortunately, you can only put comments in the chat. You can also, you know, for part two, we'll make sure people can send questions in advance, but you can post your question or comment here and we will say it out loud. I do have a question for one of our panelists, since Teresa, you're still on, right? If you unshare the screen, Jacob, I think then I can.
There we go.
Perfect. So Teresa, just based on the work that you've been doing in this area on Long Island, what are your thoughts about the CRA? I mean, like I'd mentioned, Urban League did submit a letter of comment as relates to the new rule. So what are your thoughts now? And just with everything that's going on in the Black community?
Well, you know, the original bill was coming out when I was coming out of high school. So, you know, during that era, there was a lot of hopeful activities around building equity. And again, this particular federal legislation really looked at, you know, a very important area, which was housing and access to housing. And people were very hopeful. And then it was several years later when it came up for review, you know, when we started looking at the numbers, and I remember being engaged, it was like, is this legislation really having the impact that it should? It's having an impact, but in some way, people are creating loopholes around legislation. And so then, you know, there were other policies put in place, and, you know, we moved to this era of self-monitoring. And then, you know, fast forward to now when, you know, an entity like Newsday does an investigative report, and you see how that industry is broken down to so many mini components. You have the real estate agents, you have the banking institutions, you know, then you have individuals that are dealing with their own credit and credit worthiness. I mean, you've got so much going on that where do you start? And I think, you know, where we start is here with the community. We have to hold ourselves accountable first. So at first we understand what the policies are. We understand the regulations for even being engaged. And then we collaborate with other like-minded people to move the needle forward. Unless you collaborate with like-minded people, you're an individual that keeps getting pushed around. You know, you're not getting a loan, your kids are not getting a loan, your grandparents owned a house, but now your parents lost the house and then you don't have a house. I mean, we're facing such a cycle of stress within the communities that if we don't self-educate and understand how to move around even the pitfalls, move around them, you know, collaborate with people. We've got thought leaders on this call. Every banking institution is not bad. Every mortgage broker is not bad, but there are bad ones out there. But we will, I think, with this collaboration and understanding and being armed with facts, we'll be able to move forward. And the last thing I will say is the advocacy piece. I really hope people do not get off this call without making sure that they check their emails for this information you're going to send out. You have made it very seamless that all they have to do is copy and paste and send it out. You'll feel so good once it's out, but then you also are helping to empower with the collaboration of people that are doing the same thing from their own computers, from their own homes and offices. And then tell a bunch of your friends to do the same thing. Thanks.
All right, so I see a raised hand. I'm gonna let Suzanne talk because I'm pretty sure I know where she's from. So I am gonna let her talk. So give
Yes.
me a second.
Sorry, here we go. All right, there we are. Wonderful. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Just really glad to connect with you. And I just too agree with the collaboration. We just started the Global Black Women's Chamber of Commerce. And so we're bringing together Black women business leaders. And I'm now in Long Island out in Sag Harbor. So I was just looking forward to meeting you. So it's my first time seeing all of you on Zoom. But I just want to collaborate and make sure that we partner together. So I was on today's mailing list.
Okay.
And however we need to do that, I'm here to work with you. I just came from Washington back home, and I'm very invested in our community, in our leadership of our community. So I want to work with you. Just
All right.
wanted to
All
let
right.
you know.
That sounds good. Thank you so much for joining. We'll definitely make sure we have your information if you registered. So we'll definitely follow back up with you. We'd love to collaborate.
Thank you. Okay.
Cancel.
The joys of technology.
I know, right? This is so I see legislator Arnie Drucker is on here. If anybody else has any questions, please either raise your hand for the people that are calling and or put them in the chat. Okay. And then while we wait for some more questions, I'm gonna actually pose a question to Tanisha. Because when she came into this, she was not aware of all this stuff going on with Community Reinvestment Act. So Tanisha, I would love to hear from you kind of what you learned about this process and about kind of policy advocacy in writing the brief.
From what I learned from the process was that there's loopholes to everything. And knowing that this Reinvestment Act was created back in the 1970s and it's 2020 and I'm turning 30 and this is the first that I'm hearing of it. There's so many individuals in my age bracket where you always have a side hustle. So where are you supposed to get that extra income or that money for that creative type of business that you want to have and to establish? And that this act was created, therefore, for us to go to our community bank and fill out whatever paperwork. So therefore, we're able to get those business loans because those loans are to help build up the community. So knowing that this is something that wasn't well known, not just for myself, but people in my age bracket, and who knows, even within my community, I happen to live in an affluent white community, so maybe that's something that's not as needed, but the CRA was developed for individuals that are in the Black and brown neighborhoods so they can build up their neighborhoods, therefore there's less gentrification. But as we know on Long Island, the neighborhoods are segregated by neighborhoods. So each neighborhood is like a white neighborhood, a Black neighborhood, or a Latinx neighborhood. So that just shows even more of the racial disparities that have been created on Long Island, as well the widening gap when it comes to economic equity in those type of neighborhoods. And going through the policy brief and developing it, this was the first one that I've created, and it being my first year in the MSW program, it kind of helped me put my foot forward even more with the specialization that I want to do. So the political social work in me and the racial justice warrior kind of was just ignited, and it gave me more of a voice because I am your research policy intern. So we all have Google, but we don't use it for certain things to actually research and be educated. And that's something we're not going to learn in the classroom. So giving those tools that were provided to me during this internship, I was able to educate the individuals that are in my age bracket, because we're the next ones up. So you have your millennials and you have your Gen X, and it's up to us to make the turning point, because even we can see in today, while the riots, and not riots, let me excuse myself, the protests are occurring, not riots. While the protests are occurring, when the protests end, what happens after that?
Mm-hmm.
So it is up to us as the millennials and the Gen Z, the next generation, to come up with the correct literature to have an impact on those who are in political power, to make sure that we're able to have those type of policies in place. So therefore that even though like we're putting in the work now, that will be our legacy. I may not be able to see the changes today, but hopefully my kin and my, down the line someone else will be able to see the work that we put in, kind of similar to what civil rights activists have put in for us.
Very good.
You know what, Erica? I have got to applaud what Tanisha just said, because, this has been a lifelong struggle of understanding how do we transition. How do we transition information? How do we transition? And when you think about our history and not being able to read, I mean, legally, you could not teach a Black person to read and write, because they didn't want you to have information. Now, you fast forward, you have access to information, but what kind of information, are young people accessing? And I see the young people in our programs, they're on their phones all the time. But I know they're not looking up CRA. They're not trying to figure out how to get my credit right. Like they're not getting it. And you said the magical words, which is, so how do we transition the interest? How do we get the younger people to say, okay, oh, so it's not just about the march down the street and the t-shirt and being in front of the camera and putting this up on, Instagram. How do we transition that? And this is important tonight, CRA, because you say that to anybody, they don't know what you're talking about. What is CRA? Why should I care? What made you care? What makes people care? So after tonight, you know that this is urgent and we need to do something. We need to move on it. What's that trigger that we need to tell all our listeners tonight, so that they will open up that email that Erica and Jacob are going to send out and do something with it? What is it?
So that's interesting that you bring that up, because Alita posted in there asking, what does someone do if they suspect redlining? Someone else asked, how can they how can someone as an individual be supportive in the efforts like Teresa was referring to, in terms of, collaborating and kind of being part of this bigger movement for this change? So I would say in terms of the redlining, I mean, since it is illegal, one, from the bank's perspective, you should be able to report it to the FDIC, if my memory is serving correctly, to report them. You can also report the bank itself to any of the local banking boards. Like you could find out who the specific person is, because that may not be a policy of that bank. It could be the person. So we're not trying to penalize the entire bank because someone else is doing something illegal. But that will also include that and what gets sent out. But because it is illegal, that would be something you can report. Also, if you feel like it's being done in collaboration with a real estate agent, you can report them to a licensing board, because unfortunately, a lot of times it's not separated, right? I have a real estate license and you're told during the training about redlining and steering. Legally, someone cannot tell you about a school, right? They can tell you a website where you can go look up a school, but I can't tell you you know what? You shouldn't live over here because that school system is not right. Even that is illegal as a real estate. We're not allowed to tell you that. So sometimes there'll be it could be real estate agents, a team of people, and the banker and the mortgage lender. They have a whole little system because they don't want certain people, they're trying to steer people, and they all need to be reported, right? At every level, the whole system needs to be dismantled because they're all contributing to this. The CRA is one example. And yes, there are, and has already been said, we're not saying all banks. So I don't want you to go in your bank and start going off on the banker, right? We're not saying that, right? There are great banks We have Colleen over here. City's a good bank. You know, City has been a supportive of these efforts. So we're not saying all banks. You can go on the website and look at the CRA ratings and you can see, right? Because what is supposed to be happening is it's not just a bank setting up in a particular location, you know, having an opening, and I'm being facetious, but, you know, balloons and candy and saying that they're present, right? But then they're not offering a variety of different products to help those communities, or they're not, right? Because we know from the stats that not everybody has the perfect credit score, right? But that does not mean you get denied, you know, like when, and part of the CRA is increasing access, right? For those low to moderate incomes. So that means having products and, you know, tracks that people can be on if they want to get to home ownership or whatever they're trying to achieve. So they're supposed to be getting rated on those things versus it being a lot easier for you to say like, hey, I got a good reading on, you know, a rating on CRA. I'm good, right? My rating on CRA is fine. And they're just able to check off very easily stuff without having to really be a community partner in the communities where they're setting up. They're supposed to be a partner, so working with the community. So if an organization like Jacobs and Roosevelt comes to the bank and says like, hey, I'm working on this project and we have identified some community members that would like to do a certain thing, they're supposed to be working with the community to address the issues that are, you know, like if that means doing comprehensive financial literacy, like that is being a partner, not just being in your community and just saying I have a bank, but then people say they can never open up accounts or get a loan. That's not being a partner. And that should not be okay, right? Because there are some communities that only have the one bank. So if the one bank is not giving you any time of a day and you don't feel welcome, you know, people are looking at you, you know, sizing you up, and then you're like, oh, you live around here, and already like you feel like you're getting like these different rates from somebody else that you may see come in that looks different. That's not appropriate. It's just not appropriate, and we can't continue to let things like that happen. You have to report people immediately as it's happening.
A comment from Crystal Berger from the Nassau County Legislator Arnie Drucker's office, where she actually gave the number in the chat for the Nassau County Fair Housing Hotline. It's 888-412-0474. This number should be used to report any instances of discrimination during any part of the process of buying, selling, or renting a home or apartment in Nassau County. There's also a link as well from Long Island Housing Services that's being provided. And I also know that the Division of Licensing Services has a housing discrimination disclosure form that you can easily Google that will be able to help towards that process as well. So thank you all for sharing out your information already in regards to that. And it was also another point that was presented by one of our audience members, I believe is J.R. Couch, talked about banks having different regulatories than credit unions. And I think that's really important because as we're starting to see the distinctions of banks versus credit unions and where do you go to get banked, that we still have a significant population of Black Long Islanders that are unbanked or underbanked in terms of resources, regardless of where they're at, and how does that get impacted by the CRA that Tanisha is talking about in terms of access. So for instance, a lot of the conversation has been centered around housing, but CRA can also be used in other different leverage and opportunities for small business development, services, and resources to help advance Black economic equity across Long Island. And so I think it's also important for us to understand the different dimensions at which the CRA can go towards in order to really help revitalize the different sectors and parts of the Black community. So I just wanted to put that out there because I've been impacted personally and professionally by, unfortunately, not my zip code and not being able to have access to resources because of those opportunities and having to go 10 to 15 miles away for us to be able to get the resources that we readily should get locally. So.
I think another important point is Jacob and I had the pleasure last year of going to a conference, a one-day conference, Bank On. And one of the things centered around that is really there are banks, like just regular commercial banks that we all know about that are in most communities, that now have like a separate division that is focused really on this unbanked and underbanked community, right? So they're putting forth products that represent that. Like I know from doing personal market research with the unbanked and underbanked, there's a lot of shame associated with that, right? So you don't want to come into a bank and then already it feels like you're being judged. Like if you previously had a bank account and it was closed because you overdrafted too long. A woman sat in front of me crying, like she was ashamed and said, I just rather just put the money under my mattress, right? Because I don't have to deal with people feeling like I'm being judged by other people, right? Like, so there's a discomfort of even going into the bank, and then to go in there and then not feel like you're being provided with options, right? They're asking you to have certain balances and things that, quite frankly, folks that are in this sector may not, right? For some low to moderate income, they just may not have that, which is why I think it's so important that the organizations that have signed on to this whole bank on movement are so important, because they are offering that, right? So it's a card that it doesn't overdraft, right? So whatever the money you have in the account, once it's gone, but it doesn't start accumulating overdraft fees. Because there are people that just go into debt, and go into serious red just because the overdraft thing is so exorbitant. And again, I get like banks or businesses, how they're supposed to function. But again, we're talking about specific products that are targeted to this segment, right? So that's part of being a partner, right? Offering a variety of products that will tailor to the different communities and their needs. And by partnering with local organizations, you have a better understanding of what the needs of the community are to figure out what are other products that you could offer, right? So maybe there is something specifically for folks that fall into a certain, demographic, and the card should look the same, right? If we didn't learn anything else from like the Rush card and all those other debit cards, right? You don't want to walk into a store and somebody say, I know your situation, right? Because the card is clearly screaming like, something else, right? So the card should look the same, it should still have a Visa logo. Like people should not be able to identify the folks that are maybe, have this other account that you have, right? Externally, it should look the same way. Because again, there's already shame associated with it, right? So you don't want to make a self-identifier even in the products, and just thinking about like the people that are ultimately supposed to be getting served. So I just think like, we'll also send links about the bank on, but like going to that one-day summit was really impressive, because there were banks that I even bank with that have this other program, and you wouldn't even know that that's what it's for. It's right. Just that when you call and say like, hey, even for a business, like I can't maintain that balance. They said, oh, it's okay. We have another product. And they don't say like, oh, it's another product for low to moderate income people. That's not, that also would not be appropriate. This is like, how about this? This has a lower amount, a minimum balance, and the fee is maybe only a couple of dollars, right? You should be able to, is that seem suitable? Will you be able to manage that? And you can easily transition to it in a seamless manner. And then you can go about your business and still be able to, build your credit, but not feel like you're constantly under some sort of crunch of, oh my gosh, they're going to close my account again because I don't have enough in the bank, or they're going to, because of the overdraft. Like there's so many things that give people anxiety when it comes to getting a bank account.
And when people, but Erica, that's so important that you're saying that, because again, don't forget, this whole pandemic has equalized a whole lot of folks that felt very privileged for a while, even though, they weren't that far from where the masses of people were. But this pandemic has wiped out people's savings. It's put a lot of people in a situation where their mortgages are at risk. And so it's normalized people to the fact that a special program is special for more people now. And I think it's important that you raise that, because it should be confidential. You shouldn't have to walk in and raise a flag and say, I'm so needy, I need help. You should be able to walk in and say, listen, what products do you offer? And at that point, and again, this is backing into CRA and the regulations and why we have federal regulations, because though people in the industry are supposed to tell you, you shouldn't have to beg, you shouldn't have to drag in there on one foot or look all disheveled when you come in so you get help. You should just be able to go in and say, I'd like to know a range of products. And you should be told all products, not just ones that people are looking at you and they're assessing you and thinking what they should give you, but they should give it to you because it's the law. And not only should it be the law, it should be the social and moral thing to do. Then I'm glad you raised that, because we're in an atmosphere now where more people do need the support.
Yeah, and I think like particularly since I do a lot of work with minority and women, business enterprises, like the businesses, particularly like the Black businesses. I sat on several of the calls about like the EIDL, the PPE, the PPC, like all the acronyms, right? And it was, it got, to your point, it got really real. There were people on those calls that were saying like, look, I applied for this stuff months ago, right?
Yeah.
My husband and I, we have 2 businesses, and before you shut down New York, we already were seeing a slump in the business.
Right.
My 2 kids from college have come home. They don't have a job. I'm trying to figure out how I'm gonna feed my kids and how I'm not gonna put out my house, right?
Yep.
And it's like, right. So like, what do you do, right? Like, there's money that's coming, but then there's also not like the way that things are being handled between like the banks and just like the government, like it became very challenging. And that woman was like almost in tears on the phone, right? In this group conference call, just saying like, this is the reality, right? So you can say like, it's coming, things are happening, but like, right, things are happening to people every day though, right? Like people are being put out their house. People, like there has to be some sort of flexibility when things like this happen, to not be demonizing the people who have the least amount of options, right? So like the people that have least amount of options are the ones that are like, I'm about to, if they don't extend the thing for the rent, I'm gonna be put out, right? They can't go get a loan. There's no bank giving you a loan, a little small loan. Like, they're not, right? Because they're not gonna give you a loan, and I probably don't have the family members to loan me money either. So now where am I supposed to go?
Right.
I think it's so talked about specifically with that. I hear this theme about risk, right? And talking about what that looks like, because one of the things that Tanisha brought up as part of this important work that we're doing is a large, percentage of the critics of the CRA did not want to take the risk of providing loans to low to moderate incomes at the risk of not being paid back. And thinking about all these different acronyms that we heard that were all loans, one of the biggest concerns came in is that how do we as communities position ourselves to be able to pay this back when there are limited opportunities towards economic development or economic well-being of the individual? And so again, this all comes down to this point about we have to be able to pipe in resources and opportunities in a way that gives leverage and an opportunity for all of us in some way to say, by us having an investment and faith in you, that in turn you exchange back. Of course, that's not always the case, but it's not just limited to just low to moderate income people. There are others across the board. And especially what you talked about, Teresa, about the equalizer, now more than ever, this pandemic is really going to test how does the CRA lend itself towards this design of equity, which at the point prior to the House Resolution 90, it wasn't going that way, where it was more giving a choice and an opportunity to say, okay, well, maybe I could create this zone that then has allowed us to be able to do that. And that in turn immediately takes away from the opportunity. I mean, one of the questions that was presented about in the chat was about home ownership and how do we incentivize young people. I mean, I think one of the first steps we have to do is make sure we get all the right information to present to the young people, because if we're even confused as leadership about what is currently in place to provide for them, I can only imagine telling, a 19-year-old who just comes into my organization and was a summer camp counselor, and now we're trying to say, okay, we're doing financial literacy programs, and we're saying, okay, make sure you save, make sure you do this, and have all these different options. And then they finally go to that bank that they did their savings for 7 years and say, okay, now it's time for me to take this leap of faith because I want to start my own small music business. And they get turned away because of their zip code. It's not preparing them for the full reality. So we can't just do the surface level financial literacy. We have to also prepare them with the realities so that they can understand what those risk factors are being impacted by it and how they can make those decisions. And so what y'all were just talking about just really kind of resonated with me, because I'm going, we got to really start looking at, yes, the larger scale of it, but we have to go down to the basics of how does that really impact me as an individual? How does this policy connect with me? How does it relate to me? And then in terms of, okay, now that I know I'm impacted by this, how can I then make my advocacy point go nationally so that I can support this, so that when I come back home and like Tanisha is able to start her family here, that she in turn can then make sure that her kids get the resources. She still should be able to get it now. And that's what's disappointing to me, is that we're not going to get that chance yet until we start pushing that advocacy. So that's why I think these conversations are so important. So sorry, y'all just got me in a moment where I was like,
no, I think that's a valid point. So the thing about getting, like younger people to be interested in buying a home has so many layers to it, right? Like, one, there would have to be equity and access to opportunities across the board, right? Like part of the reason why young people don't live here, like every day we're losing somebody to Brooklyn. And I can say we, meaning Jacob and I, right? Like people that we have worked with an intern say, Erica, we're moving. We're like, where are you moving? Brooklyn. Like, we've already lost 2 people so far to Brooklyn. Like, they graduated and then they're off to Brooklyn. And it's because, again, it's access and opportunity, right? So, like, yes, buying a house is one thing. Buying a house on Long Island is extremely expensive. Before we even get to if I even walk into the bank, it is extremely expensive. And young people are not being paid at a rate that's going to match up to that. Not to mention their debt, their loan debt. When I got a house, my loan debt was not calculated in my overall, like it wasn't one of the things that they were counting against you. Now, your school loan debt, your student debt is a part of like how they evaluate your risk.
Yep.
Right. So people got all this education, highly educated, but debt poor, poor in terms of the bank, right? The bank is like, no, you're not a good risk, right? But it's like I went to school, right? Like my earning potential should make me a better candidate. But from their eyes, like you have all this, all this debt. So I have debt. So I either get this crazy interest rate. Then it costs a lot of money just to buy a house on Long Island. And then let's not talk about the taxes, right? All those things, and I'm saying this as someone that bought a house at 25, right? I bought it in another state. I bought it in Atlanta, and that was not an issue. Like my little job at United Way of Greater Atlanta was enough to support me and only me. I got me a nice little house on a lake. It was 3-bedroom house, 2-story. And I was not like killing myself, right? I was able to go to work every day, work a regular job and be okay. Right. I can't say the thought of buying a house here terrifies me. And I'm older, right? Like I could afford it but like the idea of it just is not as appealing because it is so expensive. And then, like I do want the walkability, right? I do want to be able to walk out of my house and have more than 2 businesses to walk to, right? Like I can tell you where I go every day, right? I go to 3 businesses, 3 Black-owned businesses. Every day that they open, those are the 3 businesses I go to. Most of the other stuff where I live is closed. And that's not because of the pandemic. Like it's been empty for quite some time. So like that doesn't feel like as appealing. Like there's certain neighborhoods that appear more walkable, but that's not where I want to live, right? So why can't I live? If I want to live down the street from Jacob and Roosevelt, I should be able to do that, but still get access to the same amenities as they have in Merrick, right? I want to live in Roosevelt, but have access to the things that are in Merrick. Why is that not possible, right? Like I want to be able to get the loan options that people that live in the other zip codes get, if I want to buy a house in Roosevelt or if I want to go to Wyandanch. Right? Like that's the thing, like the amenities are not as appealing. Like some people would like to stay where they grew up, but if you grew up in one of those zip codes that we named, again, it's not presented to you as an appealing option.
Well, and then you got the flip side to when it becomes appealing, what happens? So we build these, developments of appeal, and then somebody like Tanisha can't afford to live there. Right. And this is 2 blocks from where Tanisha could have been living all her life, or another student. And it's so scary to look at it because I've been trying to lure my daughter back from Brooklyn. I keep showing her places and these new developments, and we'll ride around and she's, oh, that's beautiful. That's gorgeous. And then we look up how much it costs. It's like, she's like, I'm staying where I'm at. She had such a better quality of life living in Brooklyn than she would if she came out here, because where she wants to live out here, she can't afford it. A place that has all these amenities, the walkability, that she could maybe ride her bike to work or do whatever, she can't afford to live there, or she's has restrictions. I don't know. This is where the CRA comes back in. How come she can't get in there? And again, even when they build the developments within our neighborhoods, the developments themselves don't represent the rest of the neighborhood. And so it's scary, but it's taken us right back to policies, and not only the development of the policies, but the monitoring of the policy and the enforcement of the policies. Because if we have a policy and it has no teeth, then we just did a good job pushing some paper, and it's not really going to help the next generations coming behind us. So we have to be very careful that as a result of these types of conversations that we're having, that people get fired up, that they're really ready to do something on their own, independent of us. You can reach back to us and we can help guide you. We do the research, have some interns, we'll give you tools. But after that, you gotta walk your walk, or it's really not gonna work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Even Jennifer just said it in the chat here that we have to be at the table when urban planning and quote revitalization is happening. And I love that, how that was in quotes. We all know that when it comes down to those processes, particularly in low to moderate income or low to moderate wealth, or in whatever case, Black communities in particular, and how that's being impacted, not having a seat at the table makes a huge difference in whether or not your voice and your perspective, where it comes down to transportation, whether it comes down to quality schools, whether it comes down to whether or not this is the right type of business in my neighborhood. All these type of intentional conversations are being decided without the perspective of those who are in it and living that experience. So thank you for bringing it up. It's so important with it.
And Shamika makes a great point as well, talking about paying attention to the county comprehensive plans as they're being updated, right? So that's the thing. Like, that's what we were talking about before. Like, there can be many distractions, but you always need to be thinking about like the hyper local, right? And I would say some distractions tend to be like the national stuff. Yes, we should be concerned, but while you're overly concerned sometimes about the national stuff, you miss a lot of things that are happening locally, right? Like, there was a whole school board election during the pandemic, okay? That several people were not part of, right? And that's why, like, that's the reason why, like, I purposely made these advocacy things really simple. Like, you can go tweet that, you can text that to somebody, right? Because this is how you're finding out information. I found out that I realized I didn't get a ballot because somebody posted something on Instagram. And I said, wait a minute, something's not right. And then I had to call my district to find out where was my ballot, right? But how many other people that live where I live didn't get their ballot at all, right? No, you know, and that's why, like, the whole thing, you know, if you see something, say something. Like, we have to start sharing this information. So for people that are on here and you knew other people that are not, like, we need you to share the information. When we send out the email, we need you to forward it to as many people as possible, because we need more people to be aware of the information, aware of their rights, aware of what you should be questioning, you know, as you start selecting different banking institutions, whoever, if you're about to, you know, you're thinking about buying a house or whatever case may be, like, just to make sure you're fully informed before you embark on it, so that if you see any hint of someone doing something that's illegal, you know how to, like, point it out, right? You may think they're just doing their job, not realizing they sound like they're being helpful, but their helpfulness may actually be illegal.
Right.
Like, you're like, oh, they sound like they're just trying to make you comfortable. No, that's illegal. Like, some level of comfort is actually is a teetering on illegal, right? Like, no, just present me with my options and let me make the decision. You should not be steering. That's why the other word is steering, other like redlining. You should not be steering me towards any particular neighborhood, any particular place, right? Or perhaps you may feel more comfortable in this neighborhood. No, I just asked you to show me a house that meets these things, right? And here are the areas that I'm interested in. Right, like, those are the type of things. Or I'm looking for these type of banking products. Well, you may feel more comfortable. Like, no, this is what I'm telling you. And if you don't feel like you're getting what you want, then you should go somewhere else. Right. Like, we need to start using more of the power of our pocket and our, you know, our actual purchasing power or selection power, right? Like, if you go someplace and you're seeking, you know, financial products, whatever, and they're not giving you what you want, or you don't like how the person is treating you, go somewhere else. Right. Like there's power in just walking out. Right. You just walk out and say, you know what, I'll go somewhere else where I feel like my business is actually desired. And go somewhere, wherever that somewhere else is. But we have to continue to share information with others to make sure this does become a movement, right? Like there's so many things that are happening, and I feel like they all begin with the C, right? Corona begins with the C. CRA begins with the C. The 2020 census begins with a C, right? The census. So I don't know. Like
new census was gonna come out her mouth.
You know it's gonna come up
at least once tonight.
Exactly.
You're right. You are 100% right, Erica. I mean, you know, until we get fired up about this and we start understanding that this is a community where there's similar mindsets and you could be comfortable having these types of discussions. You know, you're not feeling small in the room or in the Zoom chat, whatever we're in, but you're feeling empowered because you're getting information. You don't have to always talk. You know, sometimes just be at the table. That's it. Eventually, somebody will turn to you and say, so what do you think? And we are really at that point in history where people have woken up. They do value the opinions because very often they don't get in a space where they're with people of color. So now that this is an opportunity for people to truly be brave, those that weren't and were afraid, now that they're coming into things like this, it's easy and very unintimidating to be on a Zoom call. And so now that you're on the Zoom call, put your questions in the chat because that's not threatening, but let's have conversation. Hear my opinion. Our information is the same and our needs are the same as every other community. We have challenges, you know, but we also have good, proud, you know, pleasure-filled moments where we're like, listen, I could tell you some things about what's happening in my community. I'm at peace. And so everything is not a sob story. It's not downtrodden and, oh, I just can't. You know, we've got some great victories. Look at our children and our families, churches, the other institutions in our communities, our schools, the education achievements of our children. We have a lot to be proud of. So no, I'm not sad all the time. It's not, oh, what do you want me to do for the Black people? It's, listen, what can you do for you? Because if Black communities benefit, you're going to benefit too. That's creating more taxpayers, you're creating more homeowners, you know, you're creating more of a revenue base in this region. So let's just work with each other and stop trying to exclude.
That's so important that when one zip code wins, Long Island wins. I think that's so important, and that's a narrative and a story that needs to be more spoken about, particularly with this work, whether it's with CRA, economic equity, anything related to equity in general with Long Island, is that often people say, well, as long as it doesn't affect my backyard, I don't have to worry about it. And I think that's the shift. That's the moral shift as part of this conversation around the CRA or any work that we're doing, even as Sobley or through our own organizations and the work that we do with our students. It's about the fact that when we have one community that's more benefiting than the other and not seeing the same level of success in its own individual way, it then hinders our ability as a region to lessen that $24 billion gap. I mean, that's where we're at with this, and that is a representation of our region. That's not just the Black community. That's talking about all of Long Island has lost $24 billion. And how does that look? Lower economic wages, less home ownership, less quality schools. And then we're talking about, well, it's just in those pockets of communities. Those pockets of communities are representative of Long Island. It's a part of our story. So how do we capitalize on the strengths? How do we capitalize on the opportunities, the culture, the thrive, the assets that we have to talk about what can we do to move this step forward? So I hear you, Teresa, 100%.
I agree. And Teresa, I think the other thing that we have to start doing, you know, even as we prepared for this, you know, Jacob and I were talking about it, like, I mean, there just needs to be more hours in the day, or we need to figure out a way to clone Tanisha. We're working on this too, right?
She's like, stop. She just said she in a double master program. What y'all trying to do?
We definitely need more youth involvement. I mean, that's the only way that anything else is really going to move forward. Like you guys were talking about home ownership, and that's really not on our mind because a majority of us are staying at home anyway because the way how school is set up to be so expensive, and then you go to school and you get your bachelor's degree, and that doesn't mean anything anymore. So therefore you have to go get your master's, and then you get your master's, and then they're still trying to start you out like in social work, $40,000 to $60,000 a year. Like, what is that doing for anyone? That you're still going to have to remain at home because Sally Mae is going to be coming knocking on your door 6 months later, talking about, does that degree keep you warm? And it doesn't. So have to go moving forward, we have to have youth involvement. And how do we get more youth involvement is having those conversations engaged in our own small groups of friends and to bring out that diversity amongst other individuals who are non-Black.
Right.
Because when we finally do get the seat at the table, we can't just stay silent. That is what people are expecting of us, people of color, to do, because that's what we've done for so many years, is that we kept shut our mouths until somebody said, so what do you think? No, you have to take that opportunity when there is that break in silence and say, so I'm going to tell you what I'm thinking, regardless of how you're going to feel, because you have to be purposeful and have intent when you're getting ready to speak so that you have an impactful statement, so that can make somebody have that opportunity to self-reflect and question their own previous motives and how they go around talking back to their own set of groups of friends. Because when everyone looks at the people that are in their friendships, in their circles, it's not diverse. It's someone that looks like you, or has the same type of cultural background, or has the same type of mindset that you do, in most cases.
Oh, I stand corrected. Let me snap for Miss Tanisha. Yes, don't get to the table and be silent. I will erase what I said earlier. Get to the table, and when you have your opportunity, you speak some facts. And the key thing is having the facts.
Right.
You know, don't sit there and be talking no stuff, because other people sitting at the table be looking at you like, they don't know what they're talking about.
Right. You need
they don't know what they're talking about. So
she got the facts.
They're just speaking from experience based off of what they've heard from somebody else's experience. They're not actually pulling up the data or the resources for you to follow back on. But as that person that knows that they want something to say and they have that passion behind it, then you can be able to, even while you're speaking, and say, and you can find it in this. So then, even if you give one resource, they're going to think like you already know what you're talking about.
Right.
That's very true.
I love it.
I think the other thing, and the reason why I was saying cloning Tanisha, is because the other thing, you know, as Jacob and I saw the resolution that was brought forth by Maxine Waters and Gregory Meeks, is like you have to follow these bills, like follow these resolutions, follow these bills to see where they're going. And then when there's opportunity, because there's all these like subcommittees, so there's state subcommittees, right, that are on like banking and consumer protection, right? So there are people that are representing us here on Long Island in higher levels of government, that while they don't have the final decisions, you can still apply pressure. And when I say apply pressure, I saw it work, right? When the whole thing happened about the chokehold, I think I got that text message 5 million times. You know, I sent an email, my mother sent an email, like everybody, there was pressure applied to say, you guys need to get this right. Right. And they did, you know, like it was that was revoked, right? So that chokehold, and I'm not saying that corrects all people with bad behavior, but in terms of laws being in place that negatively impact Black and brown communities, that was at least a win, that the community, you know, from the ground up applied pressure to their elected officials to be able to push them, the majority, you know, to vote in a certain way. And I would say the same is said, like you need to go online. You can go check out your senators, your congresspeople. You know, we're happy to include the links, and you could see like what committees they sit on, right? Like they're passing stuff all the time. And because of everything that's going on, the stuff is available on video. Like I watched a couple of people's whole meetings while making breakfast. You know, you can put it on YouTube. You know, it's on YouTube, you can watch it. But you need to pay attention to what's going on, because there are things that are happening and decisions that are being made that are tied to the CRA, right? and, you know, other things that are important to you. And again, if there are things that you have concerns about, you need to, again, apply the pressure, right? Again, people are elected to work for the constituents, right? So one of the things that I remember when Jacob and I went to the national, the Black Caucus, is one of the things that the gentleman from the Poor People's Campaign said, like, people need to vote for policy and not for personality. Right? Like, so I don't need to be voting about how much I like you. Right? Like, liking you is not really going to help me. Like, it's not going to keep me warm. It's not going to make sure I don't get put out, right? Because I could like you today, and then tomorrow you could do something that doesn't work in my behavior. But if your policies are the things that I actually support, right, or in line with what I want to see in my community, then that's different. I may not like you as a person, but I at least know when I look at your platform, those are the things that I want to see in my community. Those are things that I want to see for Black and brown communities. Those are things that I want to see for MWBEs. If you're doing things that are against that, you have not earned my vote. So I just would tell people also, like, you need to continue to stay informed so that you're not having to almost do, like, to me, what happened with the CRA is make a knee-jerk reaction to do something, right? To say, like, I got to make a decision, like, to just make any decision, right? Like, he's a likable person, right? But now you're stuck. We could be stuck with these people. It may be only a couple of years, but 2 years is a lot of time.
Oh yeah,
like, it's a long time to have one person in place that is not doing things
right.
you want, right? Like, that's 2 years that you gotta wait before you can try to elect somebody else. So you want to make sure when you are, you know, filling in that bubble, that you feel like you are well versed in who the people are, regardless, you know, and like what they stand for. Right. There's plenty of information. Like, I think by now, because people have had a lot of time in their house and so many things have happened, like, you know, like, what you want to happen in this next couple of years, right? We will have spent the whole year stuck in the house. Like, I want to be able to flag, like, I would like to see other people, like, other than the 5 people that I probably see every day. Like, I want to be able to be safe. I want to be able to know that the businesses in my community are going to be able to stay open. Right? Like, I want to know that as a Black business owner, I'll be supported. You know, there'll be access to, like, government contracts. Like, I want to know that. So anybody that I support, whatever they're doing, partner with somebody in a collaboration, like, they're people that are like-minded and also going towards the same goal. Other than that, like, how are we going to change anything, right? Like, we're supposed to be, like, working together. You know, the whole hashtag was, we're in this together, right? Like, that's what's been going on for Corona. For us to be in this together, you make sure you know who the we are and the people that you want to be together with.
And you know what? But you're bringing up something when we talk about who are the we's, because, you know, we go through these eras in history where we even get hoodwinked in terms of who's for us.
Right.
And then we look around and we go, wait, you realize you don't have no shoes, you don't have no house, you don't have that coat in the winter, and you realize masses of people around you don't have any of that. And then you go, how did we get here? And you realize it's that person. I wasn't paying attention. I thought the we was us, but that we was doing something else and really advocating for policies and things that were working against our communities. So assessing people and the personality, very important, Erica, because, you know, when you look who's on this kind of a chat, who can give you access to information to help improve your performance when you're talking about a CRA, you know, who's going to make sure that they open that door or get you the meeting or whatever. These are the people you bring in, and you got to sometimes stop looking at, well, the person's white or they're Latino or they're from Haiti or whatever. You know, this one thing, this new wave of this movement has started. It has started the intercultural and intergenerational, and it started this collaborative of people that are like-minded. We've got to keep that up. Every single historical change, and not just in America, anywhere, has mobilized because people came together. Masses of people have come together. And it's time that we stop getting picked apart by that 1% that wants to keep us fighting, so that we don't even know how to mobilize and organize ourselves as a collective. Now it's time. Now it's time. You put race aside, you put gender aside, you put all these different cultural things aside, and then find our commonalities. What are the common denominators? We want our kids to go to good schools and be healthy. We want to be able to send our kids to college. We want to live in a house, in safe housing, in safe communities. We want access to healthy food. I mean, there's basic things that everybody wants. So we need to stop fighting that other stuff and now take a look at the realities of the real quality of life that we're going to build going forward. Because coming out of this pandemic, we've got to find a better way to live. We have to.
Now,
Yes. Yes.
The time is now.
The time is now.
Yeah, it's definitely now.
Okay, so you need to mobilize folks. How y'all mobilizing the folks tonight? What you giving them to leave with?
What's going on right now is just not a moment, because this is a repeated moment in history. So do we want this to occur again? Like, I know when I'm 60, I don't want this same thing occurring with my children are in their 20s and 30s. So we have to understand, like, this is not a moment, it is a movement. And we have to keep moving forward. Just because the civil rights passed and then everyone was excited, but like, who wants to just have people civil with them? I don't want you to just tolerate me. I want you to respect me.
Absolutely. And I think that counts a lot in terms of not only the spaces, but the cultures that we create, the systems that we have to make sure that those opportunities and really those moments become sustainable. And really making sure that those people understand that it's more than just the topics to talk about, to respect. And that's what we're looking for as Black communities, is just to have that same level of footing as any other person, to have the basic qualities of life. And that's what I think it's important in this process. And so 5 minutes left. So do we want to wrap up with the next steps that we wanted to do and what we're giving out? So
yeah, sure.
Okay, so I wanted to first share with you also, first of all, thank you so much to each and every one of you for joining with us and participating in today's virtual town hall. We hope that you got some information in regards to the CRA and the process. We want to thank Tanisha for your leadership and your support around this effort, and to see new generation like yourselves, along with Kayla and Isis, who's been keeping the chat going. And seeing the brother Urban League of Long Island. Thank you, Teresa and Alita, and our members of SOBLE and the Economic Equity team. Shout out to all those members that are out there, because they gave us the guidance and support to be today, which is awesome. And thank you to all of our partners, elected officials, and folks who came in to not only to support, but to hear the perspective of Black Long Islanders and having an ear and an opportunity for it. I want to also thank my co-chair and partner in crime, Erica Hill from Vision Street Research, for the opportunity to join you in this amazing work, because we keep saying the time is now, and you may see that as a hashtag, you may see it on there, but literally it is. I think what Teresa brought up is so important about this pandemic, is giving us an opportunity, outside of all the unfortunate things that may have happened, a moment to reset and regroup and reground ourselves about what does it mean to lead a life equitably and unapologetically Black, and being sure that we own that in all the spaces that we're in. And so in addition to getting this live recording and a digital advocacy toolkit, and you're gonna get all this stuff in your email, we also wanna make sure that you guys know about our next webinar, which is also going to be next Tuesday. That's correct, Erica, next Tuesday?
Yes, you got it.
Tuesday, I had to make sure I had it right. You know, these days starting to get blurred, so I want to make sure. Okay, Tuesday, August 4th, 6 to 7:30. Our second part of our series is called Stop the Debt Spiral. How has this pandemic impacted Black Long Islanders financially? So we've had a huge opportunity to do a collaborative report and a survey with Urban League and Vision Street Research, and figuring out specifically not only has it impacted us, but really how do we build a policy agenda that can really stop the debt spiral. So we just talked about the leverage on a national level, and talking about the local implications. And now we're talking about the heart of us as a people. And what does that look like? And not just as an individuals, but also our Black businesses. And so we're gonna be able to discuss that, creating another call to action. And hopefully this data can be utilized as a means to catalyze change. and we can't do it without you all. So we're going to send this as well as part of that to sign up for the link. So in case you don't have it in the group chat, it will also be available when you get the email. But besides that, folks, Erica, is there anything last that we're going to say?
No.
Okay.
And thank you to our co-chairs. Let's give them a round of applause virtually. Thank you. Thank you, Erica and Jacob.
Thank you. And thank you, Isis, for doing the webinar link. I appreciate it.
Yes, perfect.
There goes those are my homegirls right there. Y'all got they've been knocking it out all summer. So please go ahead and click on that link if you haven't done so already to sign up now. And please share it out with your friends. We'll have this posted up first thing tomorrow morning of the flyer for that. But until then, thank you so much for being part of this virtual town hall. We look forward to seeing you next Tuesday.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Bye.